Ministries Bible study. We are continuing in the book of Genesis, where we've seen our ancestors, uh, the ancestors God chose to use. And if you were not really sure before, you should know now how flawed these people are that God chose. And even though they were flawed, even though that sometimes unfaithful, God always is faithful. And his choice is his choice. And he doesn't change his mind about us. He didn't change his mind about Abraham. He didn't change his mind about Isaac, about Jacob, who is now Israel. We're in Joseph's story, who is Jacob, Israel's son, the chosen son, the one that he loved more than any of the other 11. And Joseph has um, let's start at the beginning. So he starts this whole in scripture. We see his whole journey starting at the age of 17. 17. That's young. That's young. And he has these two dreams where it's revealed that his brothers, as well as his parents, will bow down before him. He's Joseph. He's Israel, Jacob's favorite child, and so his brothers are they hate him. They hate him, and they hate him even more because of these dreams. Not just because of the dreams, but because of the way that Joseph talked about the dreams. Joseph was young. He was immature. So it felt almost like he was bragging about these dreams. And these brothers who already disliked him because of their fathers making him the favorite, these dreams just made it even worse. Scripture said they couldn't find a kind word to say to him. So his brothers initially wanted to kill him, but then decided to sell him into slavery instead. So they sold him to a group of Ishmaelites who were from Midian and on their way to Egypt. When they get to Egypt, they sold him to Potiphar, who puts him in charge of everything in his household after he see that God is with him and that everything he does is good. God is with him. And so Potiphar's house is prospering because Joseph is there. And so Potiphar's has put everything in charge of Joseph, and at this point, all he had to do is worry about what he's going to eat. I looked at that and I thought, that's why his wife was so attracted to Joseph, even though Joseph was attractive. Anyway, that person who's in charge always seems more attractive than that one who's doing nothing. So her husband's doing nothing but eating, and Joseph running the house. He's doing this thing and doing it well. So Potiphar's wife lusted after Joseph, and Joseph, even though Joseph tried to stay out of her way, eventually he got caught in a moment where he couldn't get away from her, and she pressured him to have sex with her. And Joseph, of course, said no. But in running away from her, he left a piece of his cloak, his robe with her, and running away from her. And so she tells this lie to her husband. When Potiphar gets home, she tells the lie to her husband. She's already told it to the servants. that Joseph came in to rape her, and now Joseph is being put in prison for that lie. Being put in prison for that. But not just in the prison. He's in prison, and the prison where the king's prisoners are kept. The king, who is Pharaoh. There he meets the chief cupbearer and the chief um, baker, who had angered Pharaoh, so he had locked them up. And that's where we start our story today. Chapter 40. We're in chapter 40 today. But before we go to chapter 40, I want to go back again to um, chapter 50, verses 19 and 21, and see how Joseph responds to his brothers who are afraid of him now because their father's dead. And so they believe that now Joseph is going to get even with them because how they did him, how they treated him. Everything that's happened to Joseph started with them selling him off into slavery. Started off because of their hatred for him. And so now they're afraid. But here's what Joseph says in Genesis 50, 19 through 21. He says, but Joseph replied, don't be afraid of me. Am I God that I can punish you? You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good. He brought me to this position so I could save the lives of many people. No, don't be afraid of me. I will continue to take care of you and your children. So he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. He had forgiven them. He realized that God had a plan for him, and though they had done something evil to him, that God had made it good. And so it really didn't matter what they had done. Only thing that mattered to Joseph at this point is that God was with him everywhere he went, in slavery, in jail, in the cistern, everywhere he went. God was with him, and God was working his plan to get him to the position he's in now so that he will save many lives. I also want to read New Testament scripture, Romans 8:28, and this is what it says. And we know that God causes everything, everything, every detail of our lives, good, bad, indifferent, ugly, whatever it is, God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and we love Him and are called according to His purpose for them. Joseph had those dreams when he was 17. He had no idea where those dreams would lead him. They led him to prison. They led him to slavery so that he could be in the position where his brothers would eventually bow down to him. Okay, so let's remember as we're reading that God is intentional. None of this just happens. God is working his plan in Joseph's life. Not only in Joseph's life, but in our lives as well. So, Genesis 40 says, Genesis 40, get my desk cleared off. Genesis 40 says, sometime later, well, okay, so 39 ended with 39 ended with, I just put my Bible over here. No, I need it. 39, I want it. Let me read the end of 39 because I didn't put it in my notes, but I think we need to hear it. Just a little bit of 39 at the very end of 39. I'm going to read 30, 39, 19 through 23. Here's what it read. Here's how it reads. Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story about how Joseph had treated her, the lie about him coming in to rape her. So he took Joseph and threw him into prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remained. But the Lord was with Joseph in prison and showed him his faithful love. The Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. Faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. So now we start with, I'm going to put this right here, with chapter 40. It says, sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended the royal master. Pharaoh became angry with these two officials and he put them in the prison where Joseph was and in the palace of the captain of the guards. They remained in prison for quite some time, and the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, who looked after them. While they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. Why do you look upset? Why do you look so worried today? He asked. And they replied, we both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean. Interpreting dreams is God's business, Joseph replied. Go ahead and tell me your dream. So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream first. In my dream, he said, I saw a grapevine in front of me. The vine had 3 branches that began to bud and blossom, and soon it produced clusters of grapes. I was holding Pharaoh's wine cup in my hand, so I took the clusters of grapes and squeezed the juice into the cup. Then I placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. This is what the dream means, Joseph said. The 3 branches represent 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you up and restore you to your position as his chief cupbearer. And please remember me. And please remember me and do me a favor when things go well for you. Mention me to Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place. For I was kidnapped from my homeland, the land of the Hebrews, and now I'm here in prison, but I did nothing to deserve it. When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given the first dream such a positive interpretation, he said to Joseph, I had a dream too. In my dream, there were 3 baskets of white pastries stacked on my head. The 2 baskets contained all kinds of pastries for Pharaoh, but the birds came and ate them from the basket on my head. This is what the dream means, Joseph told him. The 3 baskets also represent 3 days. 3 days from now, Pharaoh will lift you up and impale your body on a pole. Then birds would come and peck away at your flesh. Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later, and he prepared a banquet for all his officials and staff. He summoned his chief cupbearer and chief baker to join the other officials. Then he restored the chief cupbearer to his former position so he could again hand Pharaoh his cup. But Pharaoh impaled the chief baker just as Joseph had predicted when he interpreted his dream. Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. Let's look at the what ifs in this. Like what if this wouldn't have happened, or the things that had to happen in order for Joseph to end up uh, to end up where God wanted him to be. Okay, so is in prison, but he's in prison in the same place that Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and baker are. And since he's already in charge of everything, he's in charge of them. He takes care of them. And both the cupbearer and the baker both have a dream. And in the dreams, Joseph tells them in 3 days, one will be restored to their position as the cupbearer, and one will be impaled on a pole, killed in 3 days. In 3 days. And what happens in 3 days? What happens in 3 days? Within 3 days, Pharaoh. Now, it was what? There will lift you up. I'm trying to find. Okay, 20, verse 20. Pharaoh's birthday came 3 days later. God gave them those dreams, and in those dreams, being interpreted 3 days, the cupbearer would be restored, the baker would be impaled and killed, and just so happened 3 days later is Pharaoh's birthday, and he want to throw this. He is throwing this big banquet, and he need all his stuff. He need his cupbearer. He need all his officials at this banquet. And when they get to the banquet where Pharaoh has called them back to, the cupbearer is put back in his position, and the baker is impaled, just as Joseph had interpreted the dream. Now, the cupbearer who was put back in his position as cupbearer, Joseph said, "When things go well with you, remember me and tell Pharaoh about me, so he can let me out of prison. And I didn't do anything to be here in prison, and just remember me." 23 says, 40:23 says, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. So you see, Joseph had plenty people to be angry with. Let's start with the brothers, yes, but he could be let's call it bitterness, anger and bitterness and unforgiveness. It could have been aimed at Potiphar for believing his wife after all the work he had done for him. It could definitely be aimed at Potiphar's wife. And now this cupbearer who Joseph helped with a dream and asked him, "Don't forget about me. Remember me, and tell Pharaoh about me so I can get out of here. I didn't do anything to belong in here." And this says, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never giving him another thought. So Joseph knows that this cupbearer has been reinstated as the Pharaoh's cupbearer, and all is well with him. And he's in prison, you know, I would think waiting for the cupbearer to come and get him. But he never shows up. He never shows up. So let's go to 41. Genesis 41. 2 full years later, 2 full years later, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing on the bank of the Nile River. In his dream, he saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and begin grazing in the marsh grass. Then he saw 7 more cows come up behind them from the Nile, but these were scrawny and thin. These cows stood beside the fat cows on the riverbank. Then the scrawny, thin cows ate the 7 healthy, fat cows. At this point in the dream, Pharaoh woke up, but he fell back asleep again, and he had a second dream. This time, he saw 7 heads of grain, plump and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then several more heads of grain appeared, but these were shriveled and withered by the east wind. And these thin heads swallowed up the 7 plump and well formed heads. Then Pharaoh woke up again and realized it was a dream. The next morning, Pharaoh was very disturbed by the dreams. So he called for all his magicians and wise men of Egypt. When Pharaoh told them his dream, not one of them could tell him what they meant. Finally, finally, 2 years later, finally, verse 9 says, the king's chief cupbearer spoke up. Today I have been reminded of my failure, he told Pharaoh. Some time ago, you were angry with the chief baker and me, and you imprisoned us in the palace of the captain of the guard. One night, the chief baker and I each had a dream, and each dream had its own meaning. There was a young Hebrew man with us in the prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard. He told we told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant, and everything happened just as he predicted. I was restored to my position as cupbearer, and Chief Baker was executed and impaled on a pole. Pharaoh sent for Joseph at once, and he was quickly brought from the prison. After he shaved and changed his clothes, he went in and stood before Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream last night, and no one here can tell me what it means. But I've heard that when you hear about a dream, you can interpret it. It is beyond my power to do this, Joseph replied, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease. Joseph gives God the glory. He gives God the credit. I can't interpret your dreams, he says, but that's beyond my power. 16 said, that's beyond my power. But God can. God can tell you what the dreams mean. And God's using Joseph to do that. He said he can tell you what the dreams mean and set you at ease. 17. So Joseph told, so, so Pharaoh told Joseph his dream. In my dream, he said, I was standing on the banks of the Nile, and I saw 7 fat, healthy cows come up out of the river and began grazing on the marsh grass. But then I saw 7 sick-looking cows, scrawny and thin, come after them. I've never seen such sorry-looking animals in all the land of Egypt. These thin, scrawny cows ate the fat cows, ate the 7 fat cows. But afterward, you wouldn't have known it. But afterwards, you wouldn't have known it, for they were still as thin, as scrawny as before. Then I woke up. In my dream, I also saw 7 heads of grain, full and beautiful, growing on a single stalk. Then 7 more heads of grain appeared, but these were blighted, shriveled, and withered by the east wind. And the shriveled heads swallowed the 7 healthy heads. I told his dreams to the magicians, but no one could tell me what they mean. Joseph responded, both of Pharaoh's dreams mean the same thing. God is telling you, God is telling Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The 7 healthy cows and the 7 healthy heads of grain both represent 7 years of prosperity. The 7 thin, scrawny cows that come up later and the 7 thin heads of grain withered by the west wind represented 7 years of famine. Famine. This will happen just as I've described it. But God has revealed to Pharaoh in advance what he is about to do. The next 7 years will be a period of great prosperity throughout the land of Egypt. But afterwards, there will be 7 years of famine, so great that all the prosperity will be forgotten in Egypt. Famine will destroy the land. This famine will be so severe that even the memory of the good years will be erased. As for having 2 similar dreams, it means that these events have been decreed by God and he will soon make them happen. Therefore, Pharaoh should find an intelligent and wise man to put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh should appoint supervisors over the land and let them collect 1/5 of all the crops during the 7 good years. Have them gather all the food produced in the good years that are just ahead and bring to Pharaoh's storehouse. Store it away and guard it so there will be food in the cities. That way, there will be enough to eat when the 7 years of famine come to the land of Egypt. Otherwise, this famine will destroy the land. Joseph's suggestions were well received by Pharaoh and his officials. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Pharaoh wasn't even a believer, but he said, can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have rank higher than yours. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in linen cloth. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck. Then he had Joseph ride in the chariot reserved for his second in command. And wherever Joseph went, the command was shouted, kneel down. There's that dream when he was 17, right? Kneel down. So Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of all Egypt. And Pharaoh said to him, I am Pharaoh, but no one will lift a hand or foot in the entire land of Egypt without your approval. Then Pharaoh gave Joseph a new Egyptian name, Zaphaneth Paneah. He also gave him a wife, whose name was Asenath. Asenath. She was the daughter of Potiphera, the priest of On. So Joseph took charge of the entire land of Egypt. He was 33 years old. He was 33 years old when he began serving in the court of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And when Joseph left Pharaoh's presence, he inspected the entire land of Egypt. I'm not good at math, but from 17 to 30, what is that? How many years is that? 23? 23? Is it 23? I'm so horrible at math. Let me see. 17 plus 23. Oh, that's 40. 13. Yeah, 13 years. Ooh, good thing I don't have to do math very often. 13 years. 13 years from the time he had the dream where his brothers would kneel down and bow to him, his brother and his father and mother. 13 years, that means 13 years from the time he was put in that cistern, taken out, sold into slavery, into Potiphar's house, into prison, and now he's the second in charge in Egypt. Only Pharaoh has more power than Joseph. And everywhere he goes, the people are kneeling down to him. That's a long time. That's a long time to be in a bad place. One thing after another. I know I'm not the only one. There's been times in my life where it just seems like I can't catch my breath. It seemed like I couldn't catch my breath. One thing happened, and before I could recover from that, another thing happened. And then another thing happened. And then another thing. I know I'm not the only one. We've all been in that place where one thing after another, after another, after another, you can't catch your breath. And it feels like, where are you, God? Like, do you see what's happening to your baby? But God is always there. And he's using every bit of it to take you to your point of purpose. Just like he was doing with Joseph. Joseph was 17 when he had that dream. Immature, 17. And though he had to go into slavery and into prison during those times in Potiphar's house, where he took care of the entire house, he was being trained. He took care of Potiphar's house. And then he went to prison and he took care of the entire prison and everybody in it. He was being taught, he was being prepared, he was gaining wisdom to get to Egypt and be second in charge and not be so immature and unwise to be able to handle it. God knows when we're ready to handle what it is he's given us. He gets us ready for it. But it's not in good times that we learn. We learn in bad times. It's just who we are. It is who we are as human beings. It is who we are in this simple world. When things are going well with us, we ain't got time to be thinking about lessons learned. Lessons learned is that I can go do whatever, whatever, and all is well. But when things are bad, when things are bad, when things are hard, we turn to God in a way that we'll never turn to him when things are good. We turn to him for wisdom, for strength, for power, for whatever it is we need to get through each and every one of those moments. And just like he was with Joseph in slavery and in prison, in that cistern, he is with us. And as we walk through our lives and face the difficult times that we face, what are we being taught? And where are we going? We don't know. We don't know all the answers. We don't know all the answers, but here's the answer. Here's what we do know. God is in control. He's teaching us, he's leading, he's guiding us, he's comforting us, he's preparing us to do that thing. All his life, all that Joseph went through, all that Joseph felt, all that Joseph went through was about this moment where he is second in charge of Egypt. And as we read in verse 50, 19 through 21, he was sent there to save the lives of many people. God had prepared him to do that. God had prepared him to be able to be in charge of all of Egypt during the 7 years of prosperity and all of Egypt during the 7 years of famine. God is in control. Now, we have to know that Joseph didn't feel that good about all this that was going on in the moment it was going on, just like we don't. We can read his story and we can say, oh, we know where he going. He going to end up, you know, a prince in Egypt. But where did he have to go before he got there? What did he do? What crazy things did he do before he got there? There was a lot. There's a lot. But right now, he is the second in charge in Egypt. So, Jesus. Thank you, Lord. Joseph leaves Potiphar. I'm on a roll. Joseph leaves Pharaoh's presence, and he inspects the entire land of Egypt. 47 says, this is still chapter 41, 47 says, as predicted, for 7 years the land produced bumper crops. Bumper crops. Bumper crops mean like there was just so much extra, extra, more than they would usually harvest from the crops. Bumper crops. During those years, Joseph gathered all the crops grown in Egypt and stored the grain from the surrounding fields in the cities. He piled up huge amounts of grain like sand on the seashore. Finally, he stopped keeping records because there was too much to measure. There was too much to measure. That's how good God was in that land. There was so much. He compared it to sand on the seashore. The grain was like sand on the seashore. He says that it was so much that he stopped keeping records. There was too much to measure. God is look. God knows what He's doing. Going on 50. During this time, before the first of the family years, two sons were born to Joseph and his wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On. Joseph named his older son Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget my troubles and everyone in my father's family. So you see, just from that statement, that Joseph don't even know why he's there. In the moment, he don't know. Because he said, with the birth of his oldest son, Manasseh, he said, God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family. That's what he thinks. 52. Joseph named his second son Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in this land of my grief. 53. At last, the 7 years of bumper crops throughout the land of Egypt came to an end. Then 7 years of famine began, just as Joseph had predicted. The famine also struck the surrounding countries, but throughout Egypt, there was plenty of food because Joseph had done what God had led him to do. However, the famine spread throughout the land of Egypt as well. And when the people cried out to Pharaoh for food, he told them, Go to Joseph and do whatever he tells you. So, with severe famine everywhere, Joseph opened up the storehouse and distributed grain to the Egyptians. For the famine was severe throughout the land of Egypt, and people from all around the land, all around, came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe throughout the world. The famine was severe, but God had prepared Joseph to take care of all these people so that they would live. 42. I think I got time to read it. 42. When Jacob heard, Jacob, Joseph's father, when Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt, he said to his son, "Why are you standing around looking at one another? I've heard there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy enough grain to keep us alive. Otherwise, we'll die." So Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. But Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother, Benjamin, go with them for fear some harm might come to him. Benjamin was Joseph's whole brother. Rachel was Benjamin and Joseph's mother. And of course, Jacob was their dad. Benjamin was the baby of the family. So Jacob's sons arrived in Egypt along with others to buy food, for the famine was in Canaan as well. Canaan, the promised land, the promised land where there's milk and honey and all the goodness of everything was in the land of Canaan. But right now, there's a famine. There's a famine as well as every other place in the world. 6. Since Joseph was governor over all Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was him that his brothers came. When they arrived, they bowed down. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. There's that dream. His brothers are bowing before him with their faces to the ground. How do you think Joseph feels in this moment? I mean, because he could be like, yeah, I told you was going to bow down to me. Yep. Now, I ain't giving you nothing. You tried to kill me. That could have been his reaction. I mean, seriously, we don't know what our reaction would be. We don't know what our reaction do, but it was in this moment that dream he had at 17 actually comes true. When his brothers, 10 of them, his oldest brothers, when they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. 7. Joseph recognized his brothers instantly, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. "Where are you from?" he demanded. "From the land of Canaan," they replied. "We have come to buy food." Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him. You know why? Because they had gotten rid of him. So as far as they were concerned, he was dead. So they were not looking to see Joseph anywhere. So 8 says, although Joseph recognized his brothers, they didn't recognize him. And he remembered Joseph. He remembered the dreams he'd had about them many years before. He said to them, "You are spies. You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become." "No, my lord," they exclaimed. "Your servants have simply come to buy food." They're talking to Joseph. "Your servants have simply come to buy food. We are all brothers, members of the same family. We are honest men." Are they? "We are honest men." They might, I mean, we grow, right? That was 17 years ago that they did that to Joseph. They're not the same men they were either 17 years ago, because God works in all of our lives, right? These were his chosen people. I think we'll see that in the story. We will see that in the story. I put a timer on today. Um, we are honest men, sir. We are not spies. Let's stop my timer. Um, yes, you are, Joseph insisted. You have come to see how vulnerable our land has become. Sir, they said, there are actually 12 of us. We, your servants, are all brothers, sons of a man living in the land of Canaan. Our youngest brother is back there with our father right now, and one of our brothers is no longer with us. That would be Joseph. So Benjamin is back with the father, and Joseph, they think, is no longer with us. But Joseph insisted, as I said, you are spies. This is how I will test your story. I swear by the life of Pharaoh that you will never leave Egypt unless your youngest brother comes here. Why would he do that? Why would he say that to those brothers? Because he don't know if they're honest or not. He don't know if they changed or not. And now he's wondering if Benjamin is alive, if his brother, his whole brother, the son of his mother Rachel, is still alive. 16. One of you must go and get your brother. I'll keep the rest of you here in prison. Then we'll find out whether or not your story is true by the life of Pharaoh. If it turns out that you don't have a younger brother, then I know you are spies. So Joseph put them all in prison for 3 days. For 3 days. For 3 days. 3 days. 18. On the third day, Joseph said to them, I'm a God-fearing man. I love that. I am a God-fearing man. If you do as I say, you will live. If you really are honest men, choose one of your brothers to remain in prison. The rest of you may go home with grain for your starving families. But you must bring your youngest brother back to me. This will prove that you are telling the truth, and you will not die. To this they agreed. Speaking among themselves, they said, clearly, guilt comes in. Clearly, we are being punished because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life, but we wouldn't listen. That's why we're in this trouble. Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? Reuben asked. But you wouldn't listen, and now we have to answer for his blood. Of course, they didn't know that Joseph understood them, for he had been speaking to them through an interpreter. But he understood what they were saying in this moment. He heard everything they said. So he knows that there has been some change, and he knows that they're feeling guilt about what they did to him. He also knows that Reuben tried to stop him. 24. Now he turned away from them and began to weep. When he regained his composure, he spoke up again. Then he chose Simeon from among them and had him tied up right before their eyes. Joseph then ordered his servants to fill the men's sacks with grain, but he also gave secret instructions to return each brother's payment at the top of his sack. He also gave them supplies for their journey home. So the brothers loaded their donkeys with the grain and headed for home. But when they stopped for the night, and one of them opened his sack to get grain for his donkey, he found the money in the top of his sack. Look, he exclaimed to his brothers, my money has been returned. It's here in my sack. Then their hearts sank, trembling. They said to each other, what has God done to us? What has God done to us? Not Joseph. not this person in Egypt. They're saying, what has God done to us? When the brothers came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him everything that had happened to them. The man who is governor of the land spoke very harshly to us, they told him. He accused us of being spies scouting the land. But we said, we are honest men, not spies. We are 12 brothers, sons of one father. One brother is no longer with us, and the youngest is at home with our father in the land of Canaan. Then the man who is the governor of the land told us, this is how I will find out if you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me and take the grain for your starving families and go home. But you must bring the youngest brother back to me. Then I will know you are honest men and not spies. Then I will give you back your brother, and you may trade freely in the land. As they emptied out their sacks, there in each man's sack was the bag of money he had paid for the grain. The brothers and the father were terrified when they saw the bags of money. Jacob explained, you are robbing me of my children. Joseph is gone, Simeon gone, and now you want to take Benjamin too? Everything is going against me. Where's his faith? This is Jacob. You know, this is Jacob. With all the experiences he had with God, where God says, I will be with you and I will not leave you until I've given you everything I promised you. This is Jacob, and he's scared. He's scared. He says, everything is going against me. Was it though? Wasn't everything going against him? Then Reuben said to his father, you may kill my two sons if I don't bring Benjamin back to you. I'll be responsible for him, and I promise to bring him back. Well, I'm sure he had great faith in Reuben because Reuben was the one who slept with his wife, Bilhah. That ain't gonna happen. 38. But Jacob replied, my son will not go down with you. His brother Joseph is dead, and he is all I have left. If anything should happen to him on your journey, you will send this grieving white-haired man to his grave. I'm going to end here. I think we're in 42, getting ready for 43, 42, 43. In 43, the brothers have to come back to Egypt. I don't have time to read that and go over it. So we will start at 43 next week. 43, next week's Bible study is where we'll start. Let's end with this. Joseph has learned a lot from 17 to 30. He's experienced a lot. He's not that tattletale little brother. He's not um, that bragging little brother telling his brothers about his dreams, but his dreams did come true. His dreams did come true. Those brothers did bow down to him. And though he's speaking harshly to him right now, he, at the end of, let me see, I gotta go down. You see, when he hears them speaking to each other in their Hebrew language, and he can understand them because he is Hebrew. He grew up with them. Um, he oh, that's the wrong chapter. 22. Um, he says it says in when they were discussing how they were being punished for what they had done to Joseph. It says 21, 41, 21 says, speaking among themselves, they said, clearly we are being punished because of what we did to Joseph long ago. We saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life. He pleaded for his life. And there was so much hate in their heart that they could not hear his pleading. They could not have compassion or love or just just compassion for any person who's pleading for their life. This was their brother. He said, we saw his anguish when he pleaded for his life, but we wouldn't listen. That's why we're in this trouble. Didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy, Reuben asked? But you wouldn't listen, and now we have to answer for his blood. 23 says, of course, they didn't know that Joseph understood them, for he had been speaking to them through an interpreter. That was one of the ways he was hiding himself from them. But in 24, he says, now he turned away from them and began to weep. Those were his brothers. And he saw that they were remorseful now, and they were also in trouble. They were also in trouble. So he put together this plan, and I think in reading that it's all about him seeing if they really were changed, seeing that, seeing if his brother Benjamin, is still alive, or did they do the same thing to Benjamin that they did to him? So they got to bring Benjamin back. But their father Jacob, 38 says, Jacob replied, my son will not go down with you. His brother Joseph is dead, and he is all I have left. Well, he says his brother Joseph is dead, and he is all I have left. Meanwhile, he has 10 sons standing in front of him. And this is why they were so hateful towards Joseph, which is also why they would be hateful towards Benjamin. He says, if anything happened to him on your journey, you will send this grieving white-haired man to his grave. He can't let him go. But next week, when we go to chapter 43, the foods ran out again. The foods ran out again, and they have no choice but to go back to Egypt to get more food. And what did Joseph tell him? Tell them, don't come back without the brother. Don't come back without Benjamin. Don't come back. If you come back without Benjamin, you'll never see my face, which means they'll never get any food. So, I hope, I pray, I know. I know that God is in control of the seed that is planted and also the growth that happened with the seed. I know that none of his word returns back void to him, that it accomplishes everything he sends it out to do. So each of us, as we are going through this study, are getting exactly what we need. See the intentionality of God. See the intentionality of God. See how God directed Joseph's steps. See how God directed Jacob and the other 10 steps. See how God directed all their steps to get them to this point where they are. Though there's a famine in all the world, they will live because he, not his brothers, sent Joseph on this journey from the cistern to slavery to prison to Egypt, in charge of all of Egypt, so that he might save many lives, but especially save the lives of his family. And why do they got to be saved? Because that's where Jesus come from. They can't die. Jesus comes from Judah. Judah is one of those brothers. He can't starve to death because we got to get Judah onto this world. I mean, Lord, Judah can't die of the famine because Jesus has to come through Judah into the world to save us all. So have an amazing evening. And I will see you tomorrow for Good News at Noon. Uh, and like I always say, if you have any questions, anything you want to ask me, just send me a message and I will do my best to answer them or do my best for us to find the answer together. I love you guys, so have an amazing night. 1 hour exactly.